Moving on then. On a related note, well, somewhat related note, somebody mentioned conscription, which means basically the draft, also known as the draft, the requirement of young men, usually after they get out of high school, to do mandatory military service. Many European countries have mandatory military service. Russia does. I know Finland does. I'm not sure. Many European countries don't. I'm not sure which ones do and don't. Obviously, you can look it up. Wikipedia has an article which lists all of them. The United States presently doesn't, but here's the thing. It has in the past. And people may comment and say, well, the United States doesn't have the draft now. That's true, but it has. And people are speculating that it may again. I don't know. I mean, that's all speculation. And, nobody knows the future. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, but it's entirely possible. The United States, I think, is supposed to have, I don't know where it's written. I don't think it's written in the Constitution or what, but somewhere it's officially the policy that the United States should have sufficient military reserves to fight wars on two fronts. And you might arguably say, well, they're doing that now. I mean, there's Iraq and there's Afghanistan. What if a third thing breaks out? They might not have enough troops. So America might yet get the draft back. They might have conscription once again. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll stop deploying as many troops with the new high-tech weapons that they have. They actually need less soldiers because they have remote-controlled weapons that can attack targets from far away without needing a whole battalion of foot soldiers to go in and take targets. So who knows what'll happen. But that's an important idea as well. I mean, the freedom to not have to join the military if you don't want to. That is something important that currently exists in the United States that not all European countries have. Like I said, Russia doesn't. I know for a fact Finland doesn't, although a lot of people are exempt from the military service in many countries. You can get exemptions for various reasons, so not everybody has to do it, but in general most young men do. I guess the last one, like the last really significant governmental freedom that was highlighted is economic freedom. This is something that I think is mostly a concern for businesses. If you're a business person, if you plan to operate a business, if you have a business or if you plan to start a business, economic freedom is very important. And that's, that's a whole range of things. That's a whole field of things like taxes, business taxes, tariffs and embargoes on foreign trade. A great deal of American trade is dependent on obviously imports from China, and so how heavily taxed or if there's anything that's prohibited, if certain imports are prohibited from certain countries, that may be a restriction as well. So those kinds of things, those sort of business and economic freedoms, are important to you if you're a business person. I am not a business person. I don't think I'll ever have my own business. But if I did, there may be certain freedoms as well in the United States that would be important to me, and I acknowledge that. And some people may actually bitterly acknowledge that and say that, yeah, the United States values its corporations more than it does its people. That is not something that can be factually proven or disproven. It's an attitude, so some people will say yeah, some people will say no, some people will say, well, kinda. So again, make up your own mind. That's a matter of opinion. What else? That's really pretty much it. One person also said when I had asked what can you do in the United States that you can't do in Finland, one person said, comfortably wear a t-shirt and shorts. Actually, you can do that comfortably in Finland in the summer. Usually in most parts of Finland, the summer gets up to at least 20 degrees Celsius, which is, something like 70, 75 Fahrenheit, pretty comfortable. You can quite comfortably wear shorts and t-shirt there for for much of the winter. But it was a nice little joke. Thanks for that little lightheartedness amidst all this serious discussion. And yes, and finally, one other person did point out, I think it was Feslin Raster, one of my longtime loyal viewers and fellow novelist. He pointed out that it's not only about what governmental freedoms you have, it's not only about what political freedoms are written down in a constitution or Bill of Rights or something like that, it's also social freedom. What are society's attitudes toward diversity in society? That's a very interesting question because there's a certain sort of idea that in the United States you can be pretty much what you want to be. That's pretty true, I think, in most of the liberal cities. Like in San Francisco, it's relatively true. You know, in San Francisco, it's free and easy. Hey, anything goes, man. There's still that sort of hippie mentality, even though the hippie movement sort of left San Francisco decades ago. It's probably kind of true in places like New York or Los Angeles. I don't know about cities like Chicago or Seattle or Houston. I've actually been to Houston and Seattle, but I didn't really get to know those cities well enough to really be able to have a personal testimony regarding that. Never been to Chicago. Don't know about Florida. Maybe it's true in Florida cities like Miami. I don't know. I haven't been to all those cities in the United States, so I can't really comment on them that much. I'm sure in much of Miami it's probably true. But here's the thing. Society is a funny kind of thing. And I'll say that yes, it's important to have that sort of acceptance by society. It's important to have an open-minded and diverse society so that you can have different types of people and that people aren't restricted to being just one thing, which certainly happens in some places, like in the American South, for example, in many southern states like... I don't know. I don't want to pick on any particular states, but I'm sure that people can use their imaginations. In certain southern states, diversity and differences among people are not really tolerated very much. So it's not really a nationwide thing. It's not something that's constitutionally guaranteed. It's not a governmental thing. It's really just, what are the people like? Are the people willing to tolerate people who are different from them, or are they quite narrow-minded in what they expect of people? So that's a social thing. I think much of Europe is very liberal in that regard as well. I think, I don't know about, I mean, some European countries are very conservative, but at least in, I'm pretty sure in much of France, people are pretty open-minded in that regard. A lot of Germany, the Nordic countries for the most part, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and also Norway and Iceland, even though they're not EU countries, but they're still European countries. So anyway, so here's the thing though, there's still a certain set of cultures that exists in a country. If you go to the United States, you'll find that most people fit into certain types. And I hate to resort to stereotypes because I think that I mean, obviously it's kind of limiting to people, but if I can be allowed to say so, there's a certain limited number of types of people. You have, I mean, there's the thugs, the classical sort of thug life people who are, gangsta homies driving through the hood. You have the yuppies, and, yuppies are, come up with your own definition of exactly what that is, but I mean, that's certainly a certain type of person. You have the soccer moms, the moms who, have a bunch of kids and are primarily concerned with bussing them around and being housewives most of the day. You have the punks. Punk is obviously a very vivid scene in the United States, and it's a thriving scene in most major cities, but it's still kind of a stereotype. I mean, most punks subscribe to a similar ideology, a similar appearance and way of dress, similar style of music, obviously, and so on and so forth. I mean, I've only listed a handful of them, and obviously there are others, but there's still a limited subset of cultural archetypes that that are that are dominant in the United States. And there are certainly individuals, there are people who are, don't conform to any of these stereotypes, but they're kind of loners. They still kind of stick out, even though they are their own people, even though they're independent and don't follow any crowd. They're still kind of social outcasts sometimes. So, the United States is not necessarily that accepting. It's not necessarily that open. If you're kind of different, if you don't fit in, it's not necessarily even that people will shun you or try to push you away and say, hey, you don't belong with us. They'll just say, they'll be themselves, and you won't really fit in with them, and you won't really be able to find camaraderie with them. Now, I myself, I'm trying to think of how to describe what I sort of see myself as without sounding pretentious. I'm not really a pop culture person. I'm more of, I'll go ahead and say I consider myself kind of an old-fashioned intellectual, and I realize that probably sounds very pretentious, very arrogant, but I'll go ahead and say it because that's probably the closest archetype that I can think of to what I think I am. I'm not a party person. I'm not a punk or a thug or a heavy metal rocker dude. Even though I do enjoy those types of music, but for the most part, I'm just a guy who likes to sit at home and read books and, just kind of ponder things, kind of the classical philosopher. And that's not an archetype that is very prevalent in American society. And actually, if you're that kind of person, I think you can actually find a social clique that you fit in with here in Russia more effectively than you can in the United States, because Russians are a little bit more old-fashioned in that regard. They have more of this regard for old things, old literature, old history and philosophy and things like that. So the idea that American society is more accepting of people is true for certain types of people. It's not necessarily true for all types of people, and I think that actually I myself, I feel more at home here. I feel more among my type of people here in Russia than I really did in the United States. And that's unique to me. A lot of people might not feel that way if they visited Russia. And, everybody's different. Everybody has different places that feel like home to them. And that's fine. Russia certainly isn't for everyone. It's not a utopia. It's not a perfect place by any means. I happen to like it here. I feel like it's a place that suits me and my personal style, but not everyone is going to have that same experience if they come here to St. Petersburg.